Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the BCMC online leadership course. This leadership course, which I've done once before, is a little different than our traditional how to leadership organizer, and as it focuses on self-knowledge and self-understanding and a little bit of philosophy as it relates to not just life in general, but also strictly the outdoors and also life in general. So it has broader applications to your career, relationships, just about every other aspect. Self-mastery, self-knowledge is the key to being at peace with yourself and also navigating the world and reducing suffering inside yourself and reducing suffering as manifested in the world. And we'll talk about all those things. So the first part of this workshop tonight is the understanding yourself section of things, self-knowledge. And whenever I talk about self-knowledge, I go back to the original maxims of ancient Greece from the Temple of Apollo. Though there were 140, I believe, maxims that were sketched in the temple, but in the entrance, there was three primary ones, ones that were considered the most important in terms of self-knowledge. Those were know thyself, nothing in excess, and surety brings a ruin, which I think are all three excellent philosophies in life to have. I will quickly send the link to the Delphic Maxims. Now, what's interesting about the Delphic Maxims is the know thyself in particular is a famous one, but it has been adopted by various philosophers over the years and changed to meet their own particular philosophy. So Socrates took know thyself and changed it to a life unexamined is a life not worth lived. And Aristotle also took know thyself and changed it as well to meet his. I do like Socrates' version. Life unexamined is a life not worth lived. I'm just going to quickly send the link to the Delphic Maxims here. I bookmarked them. Just give me a second. Some of the other ones are fun too of the Delphic Maxims. Some of them, for instance, are respect your parents. So again, this is predating the 10, maybe this, not sure the timing compared to the 10 Commandments. Listen and understand. Know your opportunity. Think mortal thoughts. Know when you're an outsider. So let me send the link to everyone now. I think part of self-knowledge and philosophy in general, understanding where you come from, who you are today, and where are you going. And that's the same for ideas, and that's the same for objects, and that's the same for civilizations. Where are we coming from? What is this now? Where are we today? Where are we going? What will it be? Those are useful questions for understanding yourself, where you came from in life. Part of that is understanding what made you you, what were the psychological formations that created personality, your trauma, your pain, and the good that helped craft your way of seeing the world, your personality, the way you react to events, objects, and experience, and of course, the way you interpret the world. But you are not powerless. Where you're coming from is not, you're not a slave to where you're coming from. We have the power to influence and change who we are. We are a culture of one in many ways. Perhaps I've realized I haven't introduced myself. Of course, I'm Chris Ludwig. I'm the current president of the BC Mountaineering Club. I'm starting my third term, or third year as BCMC president. I've been on various boards of directors, and including the BC Mountaineering Club since the early 1990s. So I think I was vice president in 95 and 6. And I've been involved with many other boards of directors, including the Spearhead Hut Society, the Federation of Mountain Clubs, co-founder of Backcountry BC. And I'm involved in the Mountain Foundation as well. which will get into responsibility and the merits and benefits of choosing responsibility in life, which includes trip leadership. In my early years in the club, I was the head trip or course organizer for the General Mountaineering course. So I taught numerous General Mountaineering courses for the BCMC and led many, many trips. And now much of what I do is part from mentoring the next generation. And my board is leading large trail building crews and mentoring people in terms of trail building knowledge and skills. In my personal life, I'm a philosopher, I'm a composer, an orchestral flute player, and a poet. And I lecture for Simon Fraser University, at least until the pandemic kind of messed that up a little bit. So enough about me. So getting on to self-knowledge, one of the important aspects of leadership is being authentic to who you are and yourself. You don't want to be something you're not. So especially if you're an introvert, being the three different personality types: introvert, someone who draws their energy from within, not from crowds. So for instance, if you're the kind of person that goes to a party and afterwards you just want to crawl up in a quiet corner, then you're probably an introvert. And me, I'm an extrovert, meaning that I can be great in front of an audience, but then I need quiet and to decompress afterwards. And then there's others, extroverts that draw their energy externally. In the spectrum of personality traits, there's three primary key ones. There's trait conscientiousness, which is, are you a hard worker or are you not? There is agreeability, that is, are you an easy person to get along with, or are you disagreeable, argumentative? And then of course, intelligence is another one. And of course, we're not going to try to define intelligence because I don't believe that's something you can simply define off an IQ test. IQ is just one. I mean, intelligence is very, very multifaceted and covers so many different things in a human being. It's not just math or spatial or geometric. There's just my own case, musical, relational. There's no, I think 7 of them, I believe. So the important first thing to do is as if you want to develop in leadership, and in a way, we're all leaders. We are leaders of our own lives, first and foremost. And the key I've discovered in life is you can't control anyone else. It's hard enough to control ourselves, let alone anyone else. The path to self-mastery does not come from looking outward, but it comes from looking inward. There are 2 great universes. There's the physical universe, which is that which is outside of us, which goes on from stars, galaxies, the cosmos, the world, all our mountains. And then there's a universe that's equally as vast and profound, which is the inner universe. And both require exploring. And sometimes when we chase and run and explore the external universe, we ignore and fail to understand the inner universe. In many ways, we are ships in an ocean, all of us. There are winds and forces that blow on us and affect us that are beyond our control. And we are not masters of our own destiny entirely. We can shape and steer the direction in which our ship goes. The greater your awareness, the greater your self-understanding, the greater your self-knowledge, the more control and say you will have over your life and over the direction you will go. But you'll never be fully in control. There are forces far bigger than us. For instance, if you had horrendous childhood trauma or experiences, pain, those will dramatically affect your ability to direct your own ship. And of course, the more you understand it, the more you come to terms and face that, the more control you'll have over your ship. But there are forces that are bigger. There's a world of people, and there's a world of events that are bigger than who we are as individuals. But sometimes what is quite interesting is we as human beings fail to understand the profoundness of our own individual power. The power over others and the power of the world it's quite an amazement to me, often, of just how ignorant we are of just how powerful we are as individuals, each and every one of us, to affect each other and the world around us. It's actually somewhat frightening sometimes how ignorant we can be of that. Um, so the first step is to start in leadership is to learn to lead yourself first before you can lead anyone else. That's the first step. And learning to lead yourself understands who you are authentically. If you're not an extrovert, if you're not a big personality, don't try to be one when you're leading people. You have to be true to who you are. That's the first important aspect of leadership. Second of all is in acknowledging who you are, you have to understand that there's two parts of each of our personalities, yin and yang, which I talk about a lot in my lectures. Yin and yang, the figure. Someone wants to text the yin and yang to everybody. We all have a darkness and a lightness to us. Occasionally, I'll encounter a person where I ask, do you believe that human beings are fundamentally good? The odd person to me will answer yes. I think the answer yes is a lack of understanding of our own natures, because we all have malevolence, that is the instinct to hurt, to have revenge, to cause pain, to act for selfish reasons. Those are in all of us. And by acknowledging the light and the dark, it makes you more honest, truthful, and understanding of yourself. If you can walk at peace with the beast within you, said you will have greater control and self-mastery. But to deny either that you have good in you or to deny that you have bad in you is not to reflect reality. We live in the boundary between yin and yang, that conflict. There is a collision that occurs in all of our psychology between the light and the darkness, and that's where we live. And the less conflict there is between that boundary, the more peace we can be. The more conflict there is, the greater the suffering there is within us. And the vast majority of suffering in the world is a manifestation of imbalance, pain, and suffering from within. It bubbles out and inflicts suffering on others. Unresolved suffering in the inside causes suffering outside. And if I make the argument, if everyone was to reduce the suffering on the inside of them, that the great majority of suffering in the world would be eliminated. Obviously not all. There are going to be volcanoes that erupt. There's going to be earthquakes. It's impossible to get rid of all that, but it's a very important component. One important aspect of leadership is understanding your motivations. Behind any given human action, there is one. If you ask someone, why did you get angry in traffic? Why did you blow up at that other driver? Some will say, well, because he cut me off. Or he cut someone else off. But that's never the real answer. There's always an underlying principle, an underlying single reason. That's the philosopher Heidegger came up with this. It's called causation. So what it means is probably the reason why you cut someone off or are angry at the person who cut you off in traffic might have nothing to do with that. It might have to do with the fact that your boss isn't happy with your performance at work, or you're really tired, or maybe your relationship, your marriage is doing very poorly. Very often, if you can peel back the layers of confusion and identify the real feelings and roots of the causes of your feelings and events in your life, you'll have more mastery and power over them. Another interesting phenomenon is that where your thoughts go, your feelings follow. So if you think bad thoughts, if you're thinking catastrophizing, or if you're thinking negative thoughts all the time, your feelings will follow. If you change your thinking, your feelings will change with them. That's very important as well. One way of changing that thinking is to live in gratitude. And gratitude is the key to living in balance, in living and happy. One of the greatest roots of unhappiness is envy or jealousy of what others have, of what others are, and often that's an illusion in itself. We make assumptions about how wonderful someone else's life is, when in fact probably they have the same pain and challenges we do. What unites human beings together is not our differences in terms of capability, ability. What unites and is common to us is our fears and our suffering. There's a chances are what I'm afraid of and what makes me suffer is exactly the same as anyone else in the world, no matter what their race is, no matter what their background is, no matter what their socioeconomic condition are. Fear And suffering is what is common and unites us in our humanity. And that's why often if you talk about people's pain in our safe harbor, an unjudgmental harbor for people's pain, they will open up to you and they will trust you no matter where they come from in life. This all will relate to leadership in a minute. So getting into self-awareness, recognizing that you can't control anyone. In fact, sometimes in life, at least in Zen Buddhism, the more you thinking, the more you try to control others, you'll find the less control you actually have. In some cases, the only way to control a situation is to realize you have no power and no control and to let it go. And that gets back into envy and jealousy. Be happy and grateful for what you have, no matter how little or how much it is. And if you have much to be grateful for, then you can try to help others with that bounty. It's a simple philosophy. And if you have very little, rather than than feeling despair over that, take pleasure in little things. Now, getting on to, I'm going to take a quick pause on that point on self-knowledge. And we're going to talk more on that. But does anyone else? Oh, and the other thing too I'm going to say is leadership and self-knowledge and self-awareness is not a competition. Leadership is a journey, as is self-mastery. And some people, if this is our journey spectrums, here we have people who are very wise and leaders that we admire. And then here there's the beginners who've never led before, and they're just starting out their journey. Everyone's at different points on that journey. It's not a competition, it's not a judgment. Some people are moving a little faster than others. Some people are moving slower, and that's all fine. That's the human experience. That's the case in any human endeavor or human mastery. I'm going to now quickly give a minute or two here if anyone has any questions on self-mastery or wants to disagree with me. They'll get quiet. I'll keep an eye out on the chat if anyone chats to me. The Dalai Lama said an interesting thing. Someone asked the Dalai Lama, what is the meaning of life? The Dalai Lama answered, to be useful. Being useful, leadership is to be useful. And as a philosopher, I often make the assertion that there is no meaning in things. A car, a climbing rope, the human body actually has no meaning unto itself. And to illustrate that, and to a certain degree, life in itself as a concept has no meaning. There's an important caveat though. So imagine if I take a climbing rope and I put it in the middle of a glacier, and then I eliminate every human being on planet Earth disappears. Does that rope have value and meaning? Not really anymore. There's no value really. So in other words, that rope only has so much value as it is an experience for a person or persons, that it enables experience. So in this sense, the meaning of our lives is the tapestry of experience that we develop and carry. We are a tapestry of experience. That's our life essence. That being the case, you can spend your life, I'll ask you a second, Greg, you can consume experience, which is okay, or you can facilitate creating experiences for others. And that is a deeply meaningful act. That is the act of responsibility, and that's where we're getting into today. What is the motivation to be a leader? And I think that's really important to ask anytime you're entering a leadership role. You're accepting responsibility is why is my motivation? Is it to share knowledge? Is it to make people's lives a little better by giving them a positive experience? Or do I have other motivations that maybe aren't so altruistic, maybe selfish? And it's okay if you do have some selfish reasons. Say you're motivated by power. We're going to talk about power and hierarchy in a little bit, which is important to understand in human nature and also as a leader. because it is very corrupting. Go ahead, Greg. Greg has a question here. It said, value. I think it can only be understood when one compares it against something else. Price in economic sense is the meter in which value is measured. And what I'm saying is, to a certain degree, the value, it actually, an object doesn't have, the rope has, economic value is actually meaningless unless the object can generate an experience. So in other words, the economic value assigned it is because it has a value in terms of what it is when you purchase it to add to yeah, I guess you could say, you could experience it as a utility in some way. I suppose that's a fair statement. But there's, like, for instance, say I'm buying a 4-wheel drive truck. If the truck is just sitting there, it doesn't have any value. But where it's valuable is if it becomes a vehicle to haul my lumber, or for me and my friends and I to go off-roading and do a trip together. And it has great value. It has incredible value then. Now, if, let's say you go accumulate objects, shiny objects, without experience. So the reason why I'm referencing with experience is, let's say you collect a whole bunch of jewels or things by themselves. They may not be, if they just sit in a closet, they're not an experience. They in essence have no value. Now, I suppose if you like collecting, say, gold, and you like staring at your gold every day, that is an experience in itself. You may question, of course, the value of that experience, but that is still an experience nonetheless. And in a way, you can also do that with an artistic object. So say like music or art is actually a piece of art on the wall or music has no value whatsoever unless there's a human being to enjoy it and experience it. That is, the whole value of that artistic object is based on the human experience interacting with that artistic object. And that's the argument, sort of like the argument I'm coming from on. And there's a famous book called On Art and Experience by Theodore Dorno, where he talks about that. I think it's Adorno. John Dewey wrote on that subject too. So being that leadership is to facilitate experiences in others, and that providing experience for others is deeply rewarding. And part of the reason why it's deeply rewarding is being trusted with responsibility is a great joy. And I think that's, a lot of people miss that aspect of life, is if they're adrift without purpose, is they don't hold responsibility. Now, in order to be trusted with great responsibility, you must prove worthy of that responsibility. So in other words, it's not reasonable for someone to suddenly be in charge of a giant banking institution. They need to prove and work their way up to establish that they are responsible and will be worthy of honoring that responsibility. So getting on to, so that's sort of is value something that only humans have? That's a good question. Having owned pets my whole life, I've seen pets do value some objects that animals do. But we're going to get in, I'm going to talk about that in terms of hierarchy, because it's actually some of the answers to that fall into social hierarchies. Let's see, where was my, sorry, got off the BCMC website here somehow. Just give me a moment here. Ah, there we are. So that's sort of just a brief talk about self-understanding. So getting on to part two, I'm going to actually move on to part two, which is hierarchy, purpose, intent, and responsibility. I've kind of gone into that. Hierarchy is an interesting thing. Let's see, humans and animals live in hierarchies. Hierarchies, social hierarchies, and it's not an argument as to whether I think they're good or not. It's not so much an ethical or a judgment call as the value of hierarchies. They just are. We're surrounded by them. Families have hierarchies. Government is a hierarchy. Businesses have hierarchies. Our club has, in a way, a hierarchy. There's a president, there's vice presidents. You know, there's a hierarchy everywhere we go. We're surrounded by hierarchies. And yes, animals have hierarchies too. Hierarchies can be arranged by two means only. One means is by competency, and that's good. So in other words, those at the top of the hierarchy are those who are the most competent. Competent, I mean also in terms of being able to live up to the trust of responsibility that they have been given. There is a second way, we're getting there, there's a second way we can structure our hierarchies, which is based on power. So now there's a couple problems with making our hierarchies based on power, because if we do that, it's not based on competency, it's based on other means, who has money, who is more aggressive, who is, you know, all that stuff. And the problem with hierarchies based on power, not only do they put less competent people in charge of things, but they also tend to move to tyranny, always. So hierarchies based on power always move towards tyranny, which is why they're really bad. So that gets on to you as if you're leading a trip, is how do you want your trip to be organized? Do you want it to be based on competency or power, i.e. yelling at everyone and dominating? I think most people don't like that very much instinctively, although sometimes we're always looking for the demagogue to save us. You know, just be weary of someone who says, all you have to do is give me your power. And in turn, if you give me my power, I'll give you protection and food, shelter. Never trust someone who says that. That's a very dangerous person. So hierarchies are also really interesting because power is as addicting as heroin in many ways. I believe, I don't have the study at hand, but if you were to take, say, a gorilla and give that gorilla a human-made object that gives its power over the other gorillas, that gorilla will be, the brain will be releasing dopamine like crazy. And what's curious is, what do you think happens when the researchers try to take away that object that gives that gorilla power? It becomes psychotic, becomes antisocial, violent, almost murderously so. And being that we are just hairless gorillas ourselves, power affects us in the same way, unless you are extremely self-aware. And that's why I talk about leadership through self-awareness. What is your motivation for being a leader? If it is authentic and coming from a good place, leadership is a great way to grow as a person. Sorry, I see my phone's going in there. Leadership will help you gain a greater understanding to yourself and your own nature and to other people. And if done right, you'll have greater compassion for other people, leading through compassion and leading through empathy. I think deep down when we lead a trip, we all want our participants to have a good time, and we judge ourselves based on that. Did our participants have a good time? In many ways, that's more important than whether we reach the summit. That's more important whether we reach the objective. The main objective is that we facilitate an enjoyable experience for others. That is the most rewarding thing as a leader, that everyone gets back safe and happy. I think that is the greatest accomplishment a leader can have. And if someone's hurt, we obviously take that burden very personally as leaders. We hold that responsibility very high. So part of understanding competency in a hierarchy is recognizing that you as a trip organizer don't know everything. Recognizing that in some ways, flattening the hierarchy makes a more effective leader. To realize that someone on the trip might know first aid better than you do. Someone else may be a better rock climber, may be able to lead harder. Someone else on the trip may be a more advanced skier. Someone else, may be stronger physically. That's okay. A good leader doesn't have to be the strongest or the smartest. A good leader simply has to make people feel good about themselves. That's the primary. and bring out the best in people to be the most they can be. That's a good leader. And that's a lot more than being the strongest, the smartest, most competent. That's not what good leadership is. The leader is recognizing those and celebrating those who are actually more competent and better than you in some ways. I remember just recently I'd entered a composer's competition, and I came in second place. I didn't win this big commission. And I listened to the work of the composer who won. My immediate reaction was, that music's beautiful. I lost to a worthy opponent, someone who had written a better piece than me. I felt happy for him. He deserved to win. That's the right frame of mind. The wrong frame of mind would be to be bitter, to insult the person, to find fault, to belittle, to protect one's own ego. That's not helpful. So if you're starting out in leader, there's many different things to do. If you're a beginning leader, how do you gain confidence? As an example, when I was younger, in my 20s, I was terribly afraid of public speaking, and I had stage fright as a performer. I played in orchestras, I had terrible stage fright. Now that I'm in my late 40s, I perform, at least before COVID, I was performing sometimes every week in front of big audiences, and I loved it. No nerves. I love public speaking. That was part of growth and, the journey to, that's the wonderful thing about life, is we don't stop growing just because we hit 30 or 40. And people can change too. Now, the big thing about change is you can't force someone else to change. Only you can change for yourself. The only person who can change you is you, and you have to want to. Assuming, and the other thing too is, if you want to change something, say you're a leader, you did a trip and something wasn't so great, don't think about the 30 things that you could have done better. Choose one thing that you can work on and master. Take it in reasonable, digested pieces as to how to improve. And it's okay to make mistakes. One of the big things where trips go wrong in the wilderness is where a mistake is made. In fact, most fatalities happen this way. Someone makes a mistake. It could be you as the leader who makes a mistake. And in response, usually a mistake is made because of a bad decision. Say you skied across a slope that was avalanche prone, had a big cornice on the top. You thought it'd be okay. You dug a pit and thought, yeah, I think it's a go. Maybe it wasn't a great decision, and something goes wrong. It doesn't usually kill someone, but where it does is where something bad happens, and then you rapidly make another decision which goes bad. You rapidly make another decision in your confusion and in your fear. And what that leads to is eventually a decision that is beyond the point of no return. If you make a decision that didn't turn out so well, stop, reflect upon it, bring the group together, talk about it, assuming it's safe to do so, of course. Panic decisions are the worst time. I find in my life, when I have a big decision to make, if I'm tired or if I'm not feeling clear-minded, I'll say I'm tired or I'm not clear. As an example, we had a decision about closing the club because of COVID. A couple of directors are saying yes, a couple of directors are saying no. It was 9 o'clock at night. We've been talking about it for hours. I said, I'll go to bed. And in the morning, when I'm rested, I'll revisit this and I will make a motion and a decision. And that's what I did. In the morning, I woke up fresh. I woke up ready to make a decision. Making a decision when you're not clear thinking is not a good idea. And it's okay. Another excellent way to build trust as a leader is don't lead always through strength, but you can lead through weakness. If you're feeling uncertain, you're feeling afraid, as a leader, it's okay to say that. I'm not feeling well. I'm feeling tired. I'm not sure what to do. That's okay. In fact, that builds trust. If you say to your team or your participants, I'm not sure what to do, I need options, you'll build trust. The last thing people want to do is trust someone who thinks they know it all and will march them blindly into trouble. That's very important. Questions? All right. So continuing, there's different styles of leadership for sure. Oh yes, here it is. Leadership under attack. What do you do when challenged? Well, tell me what being challenged means. In your point of view, what does it mean? On a decision. So you're being challenged on a decision in the field. I would say, if you have time, I would say, well, let's talk about that. I said, I made a particular decision. As in, I'm not doing that. Well, there is a time for an absolute. So let's say I'm on a trip, and I'm kind of an old school trip leader myself. I'm in a group. So in other words, I tend to lead with a fairly big personality. If anyone here has been on one of my trips, they know I have a fairly big, no, I'm not iron-fisted actually at all, but I tend to have a very big personality, and that tends to help. So if someone says, I'm not doing it, let's say, give you an example. Let's say someone says to you on a trip, I'm not staying with the group. I want to climb that other mountain. Or, okay, you guys want to turn back because you feel it's getting too late. I'm not doing that. I'm going on. I would say, as an example, that's fine. This is a free country. I said, but you need to know that if you leave the group, I said, at this point in time, you aren't my responsibility anymore. You're on your own. You need to understand that. And I said, I'm not going to stop you from going to that peak. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's a free country. But know that once you're gone, then you're not my responsibility. Wearing a mask in public, for example. You mean on a trip? Okay, if a decision is not clear, I mean, you could, democracy is a funny thing. Democracy works, in terms of a volunteer organization, but in the mountains, sometimes a democracy doesn't always work. Some examples, for instance, let's suppose you're in a group of 8 climbing a difficult mountain. Let's say 2 people feel that they want to use a rope for a section. The rest of you feel, no, we don't need a rope, it's too easy. Well, an example as a leader, I would say, well, we climb to, we have to climb to our lowest common denominator. This is a club trip. And I said, we're going to have to take our time and rope up on to take care of these 2 here. Or I might say, maybe this is too hard a trip for you. Maybe you guys can wait down here in this nice safe spot. Some creative on that as an example. That's a couple options. Conflict is normal in human nature. Conflict is what often resolves issues. As an example, I had someone phoning me up, dropping F-bombs to me upset about something. So in other words, if you're going to have a disagreement about something, there should be a base level of decency. There's 2 things in this life. There's decency and respect. Respect is something you earn in life. Decency is something I believe we're all entitled to. So if someone phones me up swearing, I'll say, enough with the swearing. If you continue swearing at me, this conversation ends. Boundaries. So boundaries are part of self-knowledge. Boundaries are about respecting yourself. So if someone is challenging your decision, rather than rephrase it as challenging, it's all in the way you frame it in your mind. I've had people say, I don't actually think we should build that boardwalk that way. I think we should do it this way. And I'll stop and go, let me think about that. There was one case last summer, 2 summers ago, where I said, you're right. Your idea is better. Let's do it that way. That's not bad as a leader to do. Sometimes your clear answers, yes, there's lots of times where there aren't clear answers in the mountains. In which case, I would say, we have a complicated decision here. Input, please. And if people are talking over to them, you say one at a time. I want to hear. So, Greg, tell me what you think about this slope. What do you think about it? Do you think it's safe? And I say, Nick, tell me about the slope. Do you think it's safe? Get a couple of people's opinion. So, Greg, you say it's no way, it's no way safe. Why do you think that? Tell me your reasoning. Why do you think it's going to slide? Any slope that's not level can slide. If that was the case, we didn't ski anywhere. Why does it look bad? We're doing a little role play here. All slopes are full of snow. It said if we are not going to be skiing across slopes, I said, well, we'll get anywhere. We're probably not going to be skiing anywhere. So we have to decide, why is this one unacceptable or risk? One of the ways I navigate myself as a philosopher people is I ask questions. And it's a way people do not get defensive. You can broach very, very challenging, controversial topics by asking a series of questions. People generally don't get defensive. It's one very useful tool for healthy communication. So if someone is freaking out about something, then ask them, why are you feeling uncomfortable? You know, why? Just ask them a series of questions. The power of the question is quite an amazing tool for understanding a person's fears or reasonings behind something. We could go on there. It's going on. Yeah, and they're not really mirror questions, Greg. They're more questions as to understand why the person believes what they do. And actually, they may be sufficient grounds for you to change your mind as a leader if they have good answers to the questions. What if they answer with a question? I would say, I'll answer your question, but usually it's customary for you to answer the question first. I said, after you answer my questions, I'll happily answer your question. These ski tours are not rational. I know, I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt of being rational. Depends on how fluffy the powder is. It's a direct, I think, it's a relationship for rationality, I think. So let's do a couple, as we talk about this. If anyone wants to volunteer a specific example where they were the leader and things did not go well, and what you learned from that. And the reason why I asked that question is, when things go wrong is your opportunity in life for learning. You don't learn a lot from life when everything is going perfectly and well. When something's gone wrong, someone's gotten lost from the group, some nightfall's hit, something hasn't gone so great on the trip, a piece of gear has failed, that's when you grow as a person. Similarly, learning doesn't happen unless things are a little uncomfortable. You don't learn if the material is easy and there's no discomfort. Discomfort is the impetus for learning and growth. So is there someone who'd like to put up their hand and volunteer to talk about a time when they had a trip where things didn't go so well? Anyone who'd like to volunteer? Everyone's running quiet. Ian or Joe, are you thinking of volunteering a time when things didn't go so well? I see a mouth going, but I don't hear any talking from Joe Blakeman. Joe, are you wanting to talk? So that's one. Yeah, Greg is saying, "Come on, as I've been in the club a long time, I've seen full-blown mutinies against leaders before, revolts. So come on, surely I'm not the only one in this group who hasn't seen a mutiny." Okay, is that Seema there? Come on, Seema.
Yes, hi Chris, hi everyone. So I can share one experience. This wasn't with BCMC, but it was a group of us going on a backpacking trip. I can actually share video too. Okay, put a face to the voice. Yes, so this was a backpacking trip that like a group of us as friends went to around Traikuni area, and it was one-nighter, and we had the plan to go to the summit in the morning of the second day and come back. So what happened was in this trip, we actually we might have come back losing one person, because on the way back, they lost, so a group of us went first day and second group went second day. No good leader for each of the two trips. And the second day, the group that went, they were like 10 and they lost their way coming down. And 4 of them found themselves on this steep, like kind of a fifth class climbing. They were climbing down and it was kind of a slippery, a bit wet, and they didn't have the right route to, yes, not the right equipment for sure, and they didn't know the way back, like their way back to the place we were all camping. So this, and the rest of us, we were all in basically like base camp near the third lake. And so they came back, and it was for me actually the first time that I found myself on a trip that something, because one of them fell, and when I wasn't there, but they were saying that when she fell, like she was just speeding up and going down, like rounding. So it was very so it was very hard experience for all of us, like being in that trip. And when we came back, like I thought about all the reasons that why this happened. So first one that I thought was this group, it became a really big group. So like an objective like Traikuni, we were 24 people. So basically very big group. That's the first thing.
So that's what we call the leader trying to play the popularity contest. And that's a very bad idea. I don't want to say no to anybody, because then someone might not like me, and then you end up getting everyone in trouble.
Yes. So my thought was like we could go three groups, like each of them 8, or like 4 groups, each of them 6, rather than like this was much better than like 24 people on one. And it like an objective like Traikuni, it's serious. It shouldn't be like backpacking and like having eggs in the morning, you know, like, so for so many of the people there, it wasn't like a serious mountaineering objective. So the other thing, I was like, everyone should have the map. Not everyone on that trip had the map going to the peak and come back. So that was the second thing. The third thing that I thought was both groups, they were the one that went in the evening, like ourselves, and the group that went in the morning, they should have had a leader. So they didn't have a leader for the party that left the place we had tent to the peak and come back. They didn't know who is the leader of this party, because the person who organized the backpacking, he wasn't there. So I don't want to take so much time, but I listed like 6 different reasons that all of these, one after another, like a sequence of decisions, one after another, led to this 4 of us basically being on a slope and like risking their life. Yeah.
So what do you think the bad decisions we're making there? Could everyone try, out of curiosity, unmuting themselves here? I just want to know, can we actually,
hi, Chris.
Oh, you seem to be able to unmute yourselves there. That's good.
Yeah, I can totally unmute myself, but I'm listening.
Okay.
I'm not photogenic, so I turned my video off.
That's fine. Yeah. So what do you think were the first of all, the leader, the organizer?
Yes.
How would you describe them as a person, their presence?
I guess this specific trip, because there were other trip leaders, that they were even more frequent trip leaders than the organizer of this backpacking. She kind of felt that, oh, like these are more experienced than me and they're present in this trip, so they will take care. People assumed that like she wasn't on the second, so she also went to the peak in the evening, so she wasn't present in the morning trip. And I guess everyone just thought, oh, like there are more experienced people with this group, that they're going to the peak, so they're going to be fine.
So this seems to me, one is failure, a major failure of organization in terms of the organizing of the group. And it also sounds like there's a major failure in terms of the ability of the group members, and the trip sounded inappropriate for that particular group. The numbers were inappropriate.
So there's what he's getting at is access.
So it seemed like it was basically from the very start.
You keep hammering on.
It was destined for problems right from the get-go.
Yeah, if you keep the group manageable with people you know, it's pretty easy. And
So that was Greg's making the noise there. I figured that out. So there's a number of failures there that right from the get-go. And yeah, so and then the question comes is, well, first of all, it shouldn't have gotten to that point. I think that's fair to say. So obviously that leader, I mean, there was one time where I was leading a trip whereby we were climbing Weert next to Wedge, and I was teaching a general mountaineering course. And we got up on the ridge at the base of the North Red on Wedge, and we were heading over, and I could see there were students that had their ice axes on the wrong side of the slope. They weren't roping up and putting in running belays. I pulled everyone in immediately. I said, everyone back. I looked at the students and I said, we're not ready to do this peak, this particular route. I said, this is what I've seen. I observed, incorrect use of ice axes, poor route finding, inadequate protection. This was only about 5 minutes in. I said, we're going to do a mountain instead. That is, we're going to do Parkhurst, which is an easier mountain. We can talk about some of these things and practice some of these things. We as a group are not ready to do this particular route based on what I observed. Back it up. And that there's a time for that as a leader. And that's me. Maybe I'm an old school leader in that regard, is especially as a mountaineering instructor, or even a volunteer one, is you have responsibility to model correct decision making. One student actually told me, and here's an example, came up to me and said, you don't have a right to tell me what to do. It was kind of interesting. He looked at me, he said, you don't have the right to tell me what to do and tell me I can't climb this peak. So young, like 16-year-old buck. And I looked at him and I said, yes, I do. I said, you're not ready to climb this mountain. So you're not, I said, you're going to come down. I said, and you're going to climb the easy peak. And I think I even swore at him. I said, you're not ready. I said, and you will, and you will. I said, I said, I'm responsible for your safety, and you're going to get in line. It was funny is about 3 months later, I ran into that same student at Mountain Equipment Co-op, and he goes, hey, you remember me? I'm the guy you swore at and insulted on top of Weert, or on the ridge. And I go, yeah, I think I remember you. He said, thank you. He said, I was out of line. He said, you probably saved my life someday, which was very kind of him. So there is a time, that's an example of a conflict situation where I say, you aren't ready. I had that on Rainier once, where I was leading a trip up the Emmons for the BC Mountaineering Club, and there was one of my rope mates on the trip, Tom, who I trusted a great deal. We had climbed a lot of mountains together. He came up to me and said, these two older climbers on this trip, I don't believe they are competent and know I don't believe they know how to tie knots properly. I don't believe they're up for a mountain like this. You're the leader, you make the choice. I trusted Tom, so I came up to the two of them. They were in their tent at that point, and I said, at Emmons, I said, or at Camp Sherman, and I said, I just looked at them, came to the tent, said, I said, I'm told you don't have the skills for this mountain. I said, you're staying here tomorrow. You're going to stay in camp. I said, we're going to climb. We'll come get you on the way up. He said, okay. That was the end of that. No argument. But that also comes from to a certain degree. I mean, and at the time I was only about 24, so I was young, even in those days. So it's a matter of, I think, having confidence in your decision making, learning to trust yourself as a trip organizer, and not being afraid to do that, and realize if someone's getting mad at you and saying, hey, the reason why I'm doing this is because I care about your well-being. I'm not trying to do this to prevent you from summiting. I'm not trying to do this to wreck your day. I'm trying to do this because I'm responsible for your safety and because I care about my participants. That includes you. Does anyone else have a story?
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Oh, I don't know what happened there. Very first trip I ever ran, just up to Paul Ridge. Group of 12 beginners, 12 assorted skill levels. And we had a great day. And then at the end, I lost 2 people between Red Heather and the parking lot, which in my mind was not possible. So what had happened is 2 of the guys, I said from Red Heather, everyone meet at the parking lot. We just have to do what we have to do to get down there because everyone knows what that's about. But they decided they were going to take a shortcut, which of course doesn't exist. So the big thing I learned from that, I got a little bit stressed out because they took forever to come down, and I was about to go back up and start looking for them, but they eventually made their way down. But the big thing I learned from that was setting clear parameters whenever you stop and start moving forward again. But that was a strange one for my first trip.
Well, one of the things is having reconvening points, especially, sometimes I've led very large groups. Sometimes I've had a group of 50 trail builders once. As an example, I had this monster group of 50 volunteers, and 2 people were unaccounted for. So 50 people, and I've got 2 of the 48. I've got 48 in one spot and 2 that ain't there. So I say to the group, all right, I said, we're all staying put. Udi I usually appoint in a big group like that a couple lieutenants. I said, Udi, and I think 2 lieutenants, I gave them VHF radios, you scout for the 2 missing ones. I said, we will wait here. He found the missing ones in about 15 minutes. They just got a little carried away in their brush clearing. And they brought them up, and then off we go. So the thing is if you delay having meetup points for very large distances or long times, you increase the chaos in terms of the time to figure out what's going on. So if you're having a meetup every 8 kilometers, that's maybe not such a great idea. So having those thought through, those what ifs, what if someone, gets separated. One of the useful things too is to identify group strengths. So one of the things I'll do is say, okay, which of us knows wilderness first aid? I do. I've done my 40 hours. I say, which in here has a first aid kit? Who knows how to use it? Which in this group, in other words, know where your talents and strengths in your group are. Often when I was leading a lot of mountaineering trips and I'd have, say, 3 rope teams, I would take what I call ringers. I would take 1 or 2 of my most trusted partners and put them on the head of one of each of the rope team, or the back. So I'd be on the front of the team, and there'd be 3 rope teams. I'm on the front, and I know way on the back is good old Tom on the back, and I know that if there's something goes wrong on the back, that there's an expert on the back in case something goes wrong. He could do crevasse rescue. He can take care of whatever needs to be done. And that's very, very comforting to a leader, especially in a big mountaineering trip like that. The old school thing of one person in front leading, everybody is, I think, a poor strategy. You need to be aware of your total group strengths and have those available. That is important. One key thing is just because you have a softer personality, or you're an introvert, or even if you don't like conflict, that doesn't mean you can't be a fantastic leader. We have a diversity in this world of personalities and a diversity of strengths and talents for a reason. If we all were good at the same things, the world would not function very well. It would function very poorly. And so use that as a trip leader to harness the best from the human resources you have. Any other stories? Is there anyone in this group who feels like they're not ready to organize a trip? And if so, why? Or does everyone feel like they're ready to lead now or have led? Go ahead.
Hey, Chris, I think group size matters when organizing trips. And I think for folks that are just starting their organizing careers, it's probably better to start with smaller groups, because as far as group dynamics go, it's easier to manage with 4 or 6 or 8 than it is with 12.
I'll talk about organizer versus with the organizer versus leader. Yeah, organizer is a term meaning that you're actually you're not a guide in our club. You're an organizer. I cut the term leader dates back from the 90s, which is sort of the generation I come from. And the reason, I lead. I use the term lead. I organize huge trips because I've been organizing trips for 25 years. I didn't start off leading trips of 25 or 50 people. That's something you build up towards. And that's kind of like, it's almost like you want, as an organizer, is after you've been organizing trips for a lot of years, you want to challenge yourself a bit and grow as a person and organize bigger trips, because you can, bring more opportunity, or in my case, I can get more done as a trail builder. And second of all, is you increase the opportunity. You also grow as a person. If you can be able to organize that magnitude. But you really do, you should not start out big. Start off with easy, uncomplicated destinations with a small group, and work from there, and plant in some, a couple of reinforcements of people you trust and know in there. So the worst thing you can do is your first trip, you're going to lead an expedition up the Ilaho with 30 people. That's probably not a good idea for your first trip. That's a recipe for problems. So B2, and I wouldn't necessarily say a fix, B2, grade 8, but but say you're an avid rock climber, then maybe you just want to do a little thing to Murren Park, something simple, a simple top roping day, and work your way up. You don't want to start off on the Grand Wall as your first trip, even if you are. Even the other thing too is you could be a great climber. You could be cranking off the 512s. But that doesn't mean you're going to be a great trip organizer, trip leader. I've encountered cases where there are guides who are fantastic climbers, but they're not very good teachers, because I have a teaching degree, and teaching is a different skill set than is leading. Similarly, I've known brilliant musicians who are terrible teachers. They're different skill sets, and a different set of skill sets to develop. There's also the human factor as well. So human psychology gets played with a bit funny in the outdoors. So let's suppose the weather's turning, conditions are becoming poor, there's a little bit of chaos or disagreement. Suddenly you can lose your clarity of thought as an organizer. Things can go really, really wrong sometimes when there's chaos or unpredictable elements. When unpredictable elements happen, say the dark is setting in, the weather's gone really bad, the route suddenly is becoming, dangerous. Sometimes there's an instinct to move quickly and to not, you can get into real trouble that way. So, for instance, when there are accidents in the mountains that occur, there's different factors. There's obviously incorrect use of gear, poor education, poor training, but there's a human psychology factor, and there can also be poor education, a teaching ability, and poor leadership. These are all factors into outdoor accidents and occurrences. But the human psychology factor is actually in some ways as important as inexperience. compromise or poor human psychology actually is as dangerous as is inexperience in many ways. Bravado and confidence. Bravado and confidence as a question. See, everyone has ego. And self-esteem is a funny thing. We want to talk about self-esteem and leadership. If you are competent, then recognizing your own competency is not egotistical or bravado. So for instance, I know I can confidently lead a group of 50 people because I've been leading trips for 25 years. That's not bravado. That's just, I know my ability level. Bravado is where you think you know it all, and you're going to lead those 50 people regardless of what experience it is, and you can do anything. You're superhuman, right? Bravado implies to me a lack of self-awareness as to your own abilities. It's not egotistical if you have competence and abilities and you're just recognizing them honestly. It's when there are distortions to reality and your abilities that there are problems. That's really, really important. So being able to make an honest self-appraisal of your ability. Post-event analysis, in terms of an honest self-appraisal, yes, it's part of it, and you can do it along the way too. As you're going, is this going okay? Or, it's very good to think at the end of the trip, okay, where did I do well as a leader, and where did I kind of come up short? Oh, and it's not always bravado if it goes sideways. Sometimes the most experienced of leaders can have something unexpected come up. You can be thrown a curveball. It happens. There's a difference between false confidence and, there are unpredictable elements in the outdoors that cannot be planned for. That's just the reality. We do our best to mitigate risk. Oh, and this is one thing I haven't talked about, but I should, is everyone has a different tolerance for risk. So and I remember back in my glory days in my 20s, I'd happily be free climbing class 4 stuff that a lot of people would want a rope for. But that doesn't mean I'd bully or force someone to also climb without a rope, if they're with me. I said, and we do have different risk tolerances. So some people will ski in higher avalanche conditions. You say there are some people who will ski in extreme conditions. Not that I recommend that. There's a personal risk. You have to, though, separate if it's related to ego. This is if your ego is involved in that, then that is actually a danger to you and anyone else around you. I think the most dangerous climber is a climber without fear. If you don't have fear, you are a danger to yourself and you're a danger to everyone around you. What I find often happens in the sport is, especially early on, is people will do their mountaineering training, they'll do their courses, they'll go on some trips, they might start leading a couple, and they gain confidence. And what's always happens, guaranteed, is something happens that scares you. Something goes wrong on a trip. It's going to happen. Something that scares you. A rock falls, or you fall and slip a bit. Something goes wrong. So then the question becomes, what do you do with that moment when you've had something not go right? So one is you stop and say, man, if I want to get to be 50 years old, 60 years old, and not get killed doing this sport, I better really wise up and reflect. I better do this safely. I better reflect on the fact that I'm not a Superman or Superwoman, and that I'm mortal. I can only, do so much. This is my ability limits. And there's those climbers who say, I better smarten up or I'm not going to get to 50 or 60. And then I've known some who don't smarten up and they don't make it past 40. They get killed. I had a partner who that exactly happened to, not with me, thankfully. It's what you do when things go wrong, whether you learn from it. You basically, when something goes wrong, it's a nugget, this gold nugget. You want to milk it for as much knowledge and wisdom as you can when something doesn't go right, to grow from it. If you don't, it's a complete wasted opportunity. It's a wasted gift. And same with any trip, where no trip goes perfectly. is to reflect upon. You don't want to be a perfectionist too. Perfectionism that's a whole other problem. That will stifle you from being able to take any risk. And sometimes, like suffering, if you try to eliminate all suffering in the world, you can sometimes magnify suffering. And similarly, if you try to eliminate all risk, sometimes you can magnify risk. That seems counterintuitive, but if you spend all your time focused on mitigating risk, and only that, you'll actually magnify risk. Does anyone have questions as what I mean by that? So imagine you have to carry every possible safety supply in your backpack, and now you have a 90-pound backpack. Or for instance, you have to dig a snow pit every 100 meters. A gas mask. Yeah, everyone has to wear gas. So in other words, you could take so many safety precautions, it gets dark, and you end up getting stuck in a blizzard and dying, running out of food. So you can sometimes stifle yourself with too much. It's called, it's like paralysis by analysis, in essence. It's paralysis by too much safety, if that makes sense. Or saying that before I can lead a trip, I need to take 400 courses, for instance. That's another example. It's like the bird in their nest, that never decides to leave the nest to fly. At some point, you have to try to fly. Yeah. That's my philosophy, too, in terms of the weakest link. In theory, if you have someone who needs a rope doing the grouse grind, chances are you didn't do your screening properly. There shouldn't be. If you have someone on your trip and you're doing the grouse grind and they need a belay for a couple of the stair sections, you think you did something wrong in your trip screening. The person shouldn't be there in the first place. Yeah. So again, do your trip screening and ask. And the best way to do great trip screening is ask good questions. Asking good questions is that you don't get good answers unless you ask good questions. So now I'm going to give a chance we've got 15 minutes left here, and I've done lots of blithering and blathering. Ask me some questions. Pauline, Chris, I organize hiking trips with friends. They have less experience than I, but lots of enthusiasm. I sometimes push them to do a little easy scrambling, but I sense I'm pushing some of them beyond their comfort level. I want them to gain confidence, but also worry I might be making them unhappy. Do I need to spend more time talking to them about these before it starts the trip? That's very true. Communication. Communication is very important. As an example, I don't do very well in the heat anymore, and I'll be out there working, 8 hours in the heat, and I'll say to Udi when he's with me, Udi, keep an eye on me, when we're working in the heat. It's because I had heat stroke a couple of years ago in the mountains. Just keep an eye on me today. If you see me looking funny or something, just let me know. So one of the things could be to say, I want to try something a little harder, Pauline, you could say, I want to try something, push our comfort level a little bit here, but I want this to be fun for everybody. I don't want to make anyone do anything they're not comfortable with. Let's try doing a little something and choose a route where you have an easy exit for them. And be honest with saying, and you could even preface it by saying, I don't want to pressure anyone into doing something they're not comfortable with. I said, please don't be shy. Please tell me if you really find this uncomfortable. And I said, do not try to be brave. Do not feel you have peer pressure and feel that you have to go into something that's beyond what you're comfortable with or ability. Communicate your feelings and your fear on this. He said, I need to know, the group needs to know, because we're all here for each other. So yes, I think I need to be aware of my own desire to be honest with them. I think most problems between human beings happen because of poor communication, and that's no different in the mountains. One of the things as an organizer, it's really important. Whenever I start my trip for the day, and I've got 50 people or 8, I gather everyone around in a group, and I said, this is what we're doing today. I said, we're going to do, the expectations are this. I do my safety talk or whatever, and I say, any questions, any concerns? I need a lieutenant. Who's going to be my lieutenant? Who's going to be in the back today? Great. I said, who's the first aid person? Great. Someone needs first aid, they're going to be it. So we do the full talking as a group before we even start moving. That's one very helpful thing. Lots of communication. We all get to know each other at the start, and a little debrief at the end. Sometimes a meet and a debrief in the middle. So how do you decide who's the trip leader with a group of friends when everyone is involved in organizing? Is a leader even necessary? Depends on the size of the group. Like, how big a group are we talking, Nicholas? 5 to 6? If you've done a lot of trips together, no. Like, I led a lot of mountaineering trips where there were typically 3 of us, and we were doing a lot of technical trips, a lot of steep ice climbs and glaciated trips. I was sort of the default leader. We didn't talk about that ever, but I was just the more experienced between the 3 of us. So I pick where we go, and I say, hey, let's go climb Wedge this weekend. Let's go climb the North Ridge on Mathieu. Okay, I'm in. I said, and then we talk about the gear, but no one actually officially appointed me leader, although I was the front of the rope. It's just sort of tradition. Sometimes it happens organically. Like, if things are happening well and you have a competent group, you don't need to micromanage those kinds of things. But if you have one person that clearly is more experienced than the others, then it might make sense to that. Or the other thing you can do is, if you have 3 people who are experienced, is assign different roles. Hey, I'll take care of the climbing gear. I'll take care of, you can divide roles up a little bit as to who takes care of what. Divide off the responsibility. Leaders off. Well, sometimes I've become the de facto leader. As an example, I was climbing Ski Hiss Mountain, and I asked the leader back then, I said, do we need a rope for this route? And he said, no, we don't need a rope. And we got up to about 9,000 feet on the thing, and there's this notch of death. And I said, I'm not doing that. I said, forget it. You guys have fun with that notch of death. I think I'm heading back down. Thank you very much. Well, at that point, 2/3 of the group said, we're going with Chris, and there was a mutiny. And that's just sort of one of those organic mutinies that happens in the mountains. But it's like, you know what? I ain't doing that. I don't want to die here just for this. I'm not doing that notch without a rope. Thank you very much. So it's like, you guys have fun. I'll see you at the camp, 6 hours from now. I'm not sticking around. So that's happened. So that's a classic 1990s BCMC trip. That happened a few times. I had one where I was doing the East Year of the Lions, and the leader wasn't doing so well. And at that point, someone said to me, Chris, I said, you have to stay with us. It's the only one who knows how to climb this thing. So I said, I came here just to climb, not to be a leader. Oh, fine. It happens. So anyhow, so sometimes one person in a group assumes there's no need for a leader, and others assume that that person is the leader. Well, what you have to watch out for, this is real interesting. So say a car accident. This is really an interesting phenomenon. So let's say there's a car accident and someone's injured at the scene, and there's a bunch, 4 or 5 bystanders. Often, some person will say, oh, I'm in charge, and they take charge of the scene. But what if they're not the most competent person? What if they're just the person with the biggest ego, and they actually don't have great self-awareness as to their competency, and cause more harm than good? And sometimes people with actually less confidence might be the most competent choice to manage the scene. So sometimes allowing sort of a leader to emerge forth in the time of crisis can actually be worse than if there's no leader at all in that case. So in a way, it's better to assume who's going to be the leader before the crisis happens, rather than with a hope and a prayer, hoping that the person that steps forward is actually competent. Have a good night. If that makes sense. I've seen it at accident scenes too. We have someone who thinks they're master of crises, and suddenly takes charge, and it doesn't go so well. Oh, the other thing too is, if you are a person who doesn't do well in an emergency, gets back with the know thyself. Let's suppose you panic when there's an emergency, or say the sight of blood makes you pass out or queasy. Then that doesn't mean you can't be a great organizer. It just means that you have to delegate, that if there's an emergency, to know that you're not the right person for the job to handle a crisis, and assign that to someone else who is. You're an organizer technically, right, in the BCMC. So you are basically, you can assign a crisis management person, other than you, if you don't handle crises very well in the field. Just a suggestion. That doesn't mean you won't make a great organizer, a great trip organizer. You can't know everything and be good at everything. Right, so we have 7 minutes. Who wants to ask me let's ask some questions now. Don't be shy. Pick my brain while you have me.
Chris, I have a question.
Yes.
So I was wondering, as a trip organizer in BCMC, what are we liable for? So an example that I had in mind is a trip that one of my friends organized with BCMC for rock climbing. And I guess on this trip, one of the people who took part, he wasn't doing belaying very well. And the person that he was belaying, she got like, I guess her ankle twisted or something like that. Not something major, but something like this happened. So I was wondering if a similar trip I organized for rock climbing and something happens, will I be liable for that?
You're only liable for gross negligence. Now, that gross negligence is very rare. Basically, that's only where someone intends to cause harm to someone malevolently. I've never heard of such a thing. Incompetency is not gross negligence. So in other words, between the waiver and the club, now anyone can sue for anything, but basically a trip organizer in the BCMC is referred to as a quote agent of the club, which means that you're covered under our insurance program. If in case you basically get sued, then the legal costs will be covered by the insurance. No case, to my knowledge, has prevailed in British Columbia in decades with paper waivers, and there was not gross negligence. And there are many examples. So in other words, if, say, someone rappels off the end of the rope and you weren't out there at the time, they rappelled off and they were hurt badly, you're not liable. I said, unless it was, at least as an organizer, unless it was intentional. Now, obviously, no one in their right mind wants someone to rappel off the end of a rope. No one in the right mind wants to see someone harmed on their trip. We care about our participants. What I'm saying is accidents do happen. I said, and no one has ever been held liable, to my knowledge, including cases where there have been gross incompetencies, and that there are some cases. It was a Blackcomb with a zip lining accident. There was a mountain biking court case. The judge said, sorry, there's risk in the sport. That's just the way it goes. The only thing that you could for is if someone intentionally wanted to harm someone. As I said, I've never heard of that ever happening.
Thank you.
What books would I recommend for leadership and life in general? In life in general, I would say Socrates and Aristotle. But certainly, I would say classical philosophy, definitely. That's definitely a good one. I've read a fair bit of Osho too, the mystic Osho. Kind of quite a character. There were transcribed versions of his lectures, kind of like what I'm doing, and his disciples would write them down. Ian, as a new BCMC member, I'm curious as to the mix on most trips. A wide diversity of skill levels, are they screened fairly diligently? So typically, the organizer does the screening. There's two layers. One is we have a screening process for the trips themselves. So we have two statuses of leaders. We have trusted organizers like myself. That is, I can put a trip on the schedule and it's generally not reviewed. I can just automatically post it because I've been leading trips for 25 years. And there's other ones which I think there's only 40 trusted organizers, very few. The other ones basically we have a screening team that'll look at and say, okay, they're leading a trip up Willis's Wall or up Yoakum Ridge with 20 people. That ain't happening, sorry. That is not appropriate. And then there's the screening of the individual organizers, their job, of course. And there's obviously different levels of competency of organizers, but some, that's a good book. Yeah, Outdoor Leadership Technique, Common Sense, Self-Confidence. Common Sense is the big one. Yeah, I didn't know of that book. It sounds good. So basically, you could also see too, if you want, as a new member, one thing to do is look at an organizer's track. You can look at the history of a trip organizer. In my case, I've organized 100 trips or more over the years. So you, as a beginner, you might want to start out with a more seasoned trip organizer and work your way from there. You can actually look and see what kinds of trips those organizers have done. You can even call them. Second, what about the leaders? Is there a good cadre of leaders in both experience and course training, or are they ad hoc determined based on experience and seniority? Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of ones that have some have courses, some don't, different qualifications. We do have a course reimbursement program in the club so that those who teach courses qualify, and the club will subsidize them to take guided courses to give back to the club. But generally it's a wide mix. You have some people like me who never took a guided courses. Well, I took a general mountaineering course, but I learned by years of doing it. And so there's the old guard like me, and there's others that may have gone through a multiple course level. To a certain degree, the old guard like me, or the guard that does it by doing it, often has a strong instinct base into their climbing. We have a good mountain sense that way. There's neither path is necessarily better than the other. Like, you can do a ton of courses, but then you get out there. Okay, here's an example. When encountering other groups, so you're talking about non-BCMC groups, I'm assuming? Non-BCMC groups that are doing something objective, sketchy, extreme example, not locking their beaner or going through Avi terrain at a terrible time, was the best way to approach the system, the situation. I've encountered that. And typically I might say, I might just make I'm not going to tell them what to do because it's a free world, but I will say, between you and me, I think you may want to rethink what you're doing here. In my opinion, that's maybe not the best. I might say that. Just that I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I personally, that line seems a bit sketchy to me. There's no harm in saying that, but you don't want to come out as judgmental. Human beings are very sensitive to feel like they're being judged or looked down upon. So if you just say, or if you see someone, say, who's back clipping, or someone who's not tied in properly, come up and say, hey, just between you and me. Oh, here's an example, Eddie. One time I was rock climbing, and one of my old rock climbing partners hadn't clipped the system in correctly. Very, very experienced climber. Very experienced, and I said to him, "We're out of the system," and fixed it quick. But I didn't have to shame him. I just said, "We're out of the system. That's it." Yeah, just a quick little statement, So it's often in the delivery, Eddie, of how you say it. When you're correcting, is you don't want to shame someone. You want to approach that diplomatically, I think. Any final questions here as we're at 30? Yeah, I think it's certainly helpful to chime in, but some people can really get nasty if they feel like they're being told what to do. I've seen that. Any final questions before I wrap it up to the night here? I could go on forever, but do you guys want me to post this thing in a place where you guys can watch this again if you want? Eddie? Yeah.
Doesn't hurt.
Okay. And I don't know when I'll be in the mood to do another one of these things again, so depends on my energy levels. Is there any good title? AMC Guide to Outdoor Leadership. Oh, that looks cool, yes. I don't know. Actually, I haven't heard of that one, Pauline. I haven't heard of that one. No, that's a good idea. Yeah. I'd give it a shot. I think outdoor leadership, again, is often the more psychology you can do and the more philosophy you can have, I think the stronger leader you'll be. But getting good at communicating with people too, in a way where people are comfortable talking to you. And one of the things I do as an organizer, if I have a big group and I'm going along and I've got 40 people, I say, how you enjoying today? I'm just walking along. Are you having fun today? So how's it going? Got anything I can help you with? And just casually checking in with people if you can. If you're on a roper, I know it's harder, but if you just check in on people, having fun today? I said, this weather's horrible. I said, but you're doing okay over there. You're looking a little cold. Just these little things that show you care as an organizer. It really goes a long way. Great. I think we'll leave it at that unless anyone has any final comments. I know I was a little free form tonight here, not necessarily too structured, but I think that's okay. Okay, have a good night, everyone. Thank you for joining in.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks.
Have a good night.